Hey everyone, welcome back to Hacker News Daily Podcast. It's Wednesday, August 6th, 2025. And wow, do we have some fascinating stories for you today. Out of 29 stories that hit the front page, we've pulled the 3 that really captured the community's imagination. And honestly, they paint such an interesting picture of where tech is headed right now. We're talking about AI models shrinking down to pocket size, the bizarre contradictions in how tech companies hire, and how a text editor from the 1970s might actually be showing us the future of AI-assisted coding. What's fascinating is how these stories all connect to this bigger theme we're seeing across the industry. This tension between making technology more accessible while simultaneously making it more complex, between automation that's supposed to help us and systems that seem to work against us. So let's dive in, starting with something that might just change how we think about AI deployment entirely. One commenter who actually tested it said, "Look, the voices are definitely more mechanical sounding than something like F55, TTS, or fish speech. There's a noticeable quality trade-off here. But, and this is a big but, they also pointed out that this thing runs at about 5 times real-time speed on a modern CPU, with only about 315 milliseconds of initial latency. That's actually pretty usable for a lot of applications." What really has people excited, though, is the deployment story. This is Apache 2.0 licensed, which means it's truly open source, no strings attached. One person in the comments mentioned they got it running on a Raspberry Pi Zero. Think about that for a second. We're talking about realistic-ish text-to-speech on hardware that costs less than a fancy coffee. Another commenter made this great point that TTS has essentially gone from being a hardware and licensing problem to just a packaging problem. The developers are calling this a developer preview right now, and they're promising SDKs for mobile and web platforms. Can you imagine having decent quality text-to-speech running entirely in your browser, no internet connection required? Or building an app that can read text aloud without sending anything to the cloud? The privacy implications alone are huge. Now, there was some healthy debate in the comments about whether this trade-off makes sense. One user basically said, "Look, I've got a GPU sitting here. Why would I want worse quality just to run on CPU?" And that's fair. If you're building a high-end application where quality is paramount, this probably isn't for you yet. But think about all the use cases where good enough quality in a tiny, portable package is exactly what you need. Embedded systems, offline mobile apps, accessibility tools that need to work everywhere, IoT devices. Suddenly, all of these become viable platforms for voice synthesis. There was one particularly interesting technical discussion about how they might have achieved this compression. Some speculate it's using really clever architectural choices, maybe some form of knowledge distillation from larger models. The fact that they're calling the voices Expr Voice 1 through Expr Voice 8 suggests they might be using some kind of voice embedding system that keeps the core model small while swapping out voice characteristics. One commenter did report some compatibility issues with different Python versions, so the "works literally everywhere" tagline might be a bit optimistic. But honestly, that's pretty standard for any new open source project. What strikes me most about this whole discussion is how it represents this broader trend we're seeing in AI right now, this push toward efficiency and accessibility. We spent the last few years just making models bigger and bigger, throwing more compute at problems, and now we're starting to see this counter-movement of, wait, can we make this actually practical for normal people to use? The 960 points this story racked up tells you the community sees the potential here. Even with the quality compromises, even with it being a developer preview, people are excited about what this could enable. It's not going to replace 11 Labs or professional voice synthesis anytime soon, but it might just democratize pretty good text-to-speech in a way we haven't seen before. And speaking of companies making interesting technical choices, this next story really caught my eye because it perfectly captures one of those "you can't make this stuff up" moments in tech. The headline alone had me doing a double take. I gave the AI arms and legs, then it rejected me. Now, before you start picturing some sci-fi scenario where a robot literally pushes someone away, let me explain what actually happened here, because it's both hilarious and kind of infuriating at the same time. So, there's this developer who created an open source library called Enigo, that's Enigo, which basically lets programs control your computer's mouse and keyboard. Think of it as giving software the ability to physically interact with your machine. Clicking buttons, typing text, moving the cursor around, you get the idea. It's the kind of low-level, unglamorous work that's surprisingly difficult to get right because, as the author points out, there's barely any documentation for this stuff. Here's where it gets interesting. Anthropic, the AI company behind Claude, that's valued at over $60 billion, they needed exactly this functionality for their new feature called computer use. This is the thing they launched in October that lets Claude actually control your computer, which is both incredibly cool and slightly terrifying depending on your perspective. And what did they choose to power this feature? Yep, our friends' open source Enigo library. The author discovered this by doing some digital archaeology. They dug into Claude Desktop's binary files and found these file paths pointing straight to Enigo version 2.1.1 in the cargo registry. It's being used for input simulation on both Windows and macOS. So this person's code is literally the foundation that lets Claude interact with millions of users' computers. Now, here's the kicker, and this is where the rejected me part comes in. Despite Anthropic using their code as a core component of a major product feature, when this developer applied for a job at Anthropic, rejected, not even an interview, just a standard thanks but no thanks email. The Hacker News crowd absolutely went to town on this one, nearly 800 points and almost 400 comments. And honestly, I can see why. It's such a perfect encapsulation of everything that feels broken about tech hiring right now. You've got a company with, as the author puts it, seemingly infinite development budget, and instead of building their own solution, they're using this person's open source work because it's good enough for production. But somehow, that same person isn't good enough to work there. The comments section turned into this fascinating group therapy session about the state of tech recruiting. One theme that kept coming up was how HR departments and these automated application systems they're completely failing to identify qualified candidates. People are sharing stories about being auto-rejected for positions where they literally wrote the software the company is using. There's this growing sentiment that HR lacks the technical competence to actually evaluate engineering talent, so they fall back on keyword matching and arbitrary filters. What really struck me was this observation from one commenter who goes by Siva7. They suggested that being an open source maintainer might actually work against you in some cases. The theory is that some teams prefer what they called low-profile hires who won't overshadow others on the team. Can you imagine? Your code is good enough to ship to millions of users, but you might be too accomplished to hire? Make it make sense. And then there's the whole networking angle. Several people pointed out that the author probably should have leveraged their connection more strategically. Reached out directly, mentioned the library, maybe gotten a warm introduction. The fact that they just applied through the normal channels was seen as naive. Which, shouldn't, hey, you're literally using my code in production be the ultimate warm introduction? But here's what really gets me about this whole situation. We're constantly hearing about how there's a talent shortage in tech, how companies can't find qualified engineers, how they're desperate for people who can actually ship working code. And yet, here's someone who's demonstrably created something valuable enough that a $60 billion company chose to use it over building their own solution, and they can't even get an interview. The irony is just chef's kiss perfect, right? The author gave Claude the ability to control computers. They literally gave the AI arms and legs, as the title says, and then the company behind Claude rejected them. It's like, your code is good enough to be part of our core product functionality, but you're not good enough to maintain it? Some commenters tried to defend the situation, suggesting maybe the role wasn't a good fit, or maybe there were other factors we don't know about. And sure, that's possible. But when you zoom out and look at the pattern, because this isn't an isolated incident, people are sharing dozens of similar stories in the comments, it really does point to something fundamentally broken in how tech companies evaluate talent. The whole thing also raises interesting questions about open source sustainability. If companies can just take your work, use it in their billion-dollar products, and then not even give you the time of day when you apply, what's the incentive to keep contributing? One person in the comments mentioned how open source contributions used to be a golden ticket to getting hired, and now it seems to carry almost no weight at all. You know what this reminds me of? It's like being a musician who writes a hit song that a record label makes millions from, but when you audition to join their roster, they tell you you're not quite what they're looking for. The disconnect is just staggering. Story 3. Claude Code IDE integration for Emacs. And speaking of tools that refuse to die, let me tell you about something that's got the Hacker News crowd absolutely buzzing. We're talking 772 points and over 260 comments worth of excitement. It's called Claude Code IDE integration for Emacs. And before you roll your eyes thinking, oh great, another AI plugin, this one's actually doing something genuinely fascinating. So here's what's happening. Someone's built this incredibly sophisticated bridge between Claude AI and Emacs using something called the Model Context Protocol, or MCP. And I know what you're thinking, Emacs in 2024? But hear me out, because this might actually be showing us something important about where AI coding assistants are headed. What makes this special isn't just that you can chat with Claude from inside Emacs. That'd be pretty boring, honestly. No, what they've done is they've made Claude actually understand Emacs, like deeply understand it. We're talking about Claude being able to tap directly into the language service protocol, use tree sitter for parsing abstract syntax trees, navigate through your code using iMenu. Basically, they've turned decades of Emacs ecosystem development into an AI playground. The really wild part? You can expose literally any Emacs command or function as a tool that Claude can use. Think about that for a second. Emacs has been around since the 70s, and people have been writing extensions for it this entire time. Now suddenly, all of that functionality, project-wide searches, refactoring tools, specialized modes for different languages, custom eLisp functions that some wizard wrote in 1987, all of it becomes accessible to an AI assistant. It's like, imagine if you could suddenly give ChatGPT the ability to use every Unix command line tool ever written. That's the scale we're talking about here. The Hacker News discussion around this is fascinating because it's split into these really distinct camps. You've got the Emacs diehards who are absolutely thrilled. They're saying things like, finally, our weird obsession with this ancient editor is paying off. Because think about it. While everyone else is trying to figure out how to integrate AI into VS Code or whatever, Emacs and Vim users are sitting there with editors that are literally designed to be programmable and extensible. One commenter pointed out that traditional editors might actually have a competitive advantage in the AI age precisely because they're so hackable. But then, and this is where it gets interesting, you've also got longtime Emacs users who are just exhausted. There's this whole thread about how setting up modern Emacs tooling has become this nightmare of configuration. One person's trying to get GoPols working with LSP mode and tree sitter, and they're just like, I've been using Emacs for 20 years and I can't figure this out anymore. It's this weird paradox where the tool that's supposed to be infinitely customizable has become so complex that even experts struggle with it. There's also this really thoughtful debate about whether this is solving a real problem or not. One user, Efits, makes this point that, okay, who exactly is the audience here? Because the Venn diagram of people who use Emacs and people excited about agentic coding might actually be two circles that barely touch. It's a fair point. Are we building incredibly sophisticated tools for an audience of like 12 people? But I think there's something bigger happening here. This approach of making the AI editor aware rather than just embedding AI features into an editor, that's a fundamental shift in how we think about these tools. Instead of building new AI-first coding environments from scratch, what if we taught AI to deeply understand and manipulate our existing tools? The security concerns people raised are totally valid, though. Several commenters pointed out that giving an AI this level of access to your development environment is, well, it's a lot of trust. You're essentially letting Claude execute arbitrary code through Emacs. One person mentioned they love to use this for work, but there's no way their security team would sign off on it. What really strikes me about this whole thing is how it represents this collision between old and new paradigms in software development. You've got Emacs, this piece of software that predates most of its users, suddenly becoming cutting edge again because its fundamental design principles, extensibility, programmability, everything is text, turn out to be exactly what you want for AI integration. And that wraps up our top 3 stories from Hacker News today, August 6, 2025. What a fascinating collection, right? We started with Kitten TTS showing us that maybe the future of AI isn't about bigger models, but smarter, more efficient ones that can run anywhere. Then we saw the absurdity of modern tech hiring through the lens of someone whose code is literally powering Anthropic's products but can't get an interview there. And finally, we explored how a text editor from the disco era might actually be pointing the way forward for AI-assisted development. If there's a thread connecting all of these stories, it's this. The tech industry is at this really interesting inflection point where we're questioning a lot of our basic assumptions. Do we need massive models when tiny ones might work? Are our hiring processes actually finding the best people? And are the newest tools always the best? Or might there be wisdom in software that's been battle-tested for decades? These were the stories that rose to the top out of 29 submissions today, and I think they rose to the top for a reason. They're touching on anxieties and hopes that a lot of us in tech are feeling right now. Thanks for listening to the Hacker News Daily Podcast. If you want to dive deeper into any of these stories, check out the links in the show notes. And hey, if you're building something cool, whether it's a 25 megabyte AI model or an Emacs plugin, maybe we'll be talking about your project in a future episode. Until tomorrow, keep hacking, keep questioning, and maybe, just maybe, check if that company rejecting you is already using your open source code. You never know. This has been your host bringing you the best of Hacker News. See you tomorrow.